I got a ride right off from a young fellow from Connecticut who was driving around the country in his jalopy painting. He was the son of an editor in the East. He talked and talked. I was sick from drinking and from the altitude. At one point, I almost had to stick my head out the window. But by the time he let me off at Longmont, Colorado, I was feeling normal again and had even started telling him about the state of my own travels. He wished me luck. It was beautiful in Longmont. Under a tremendous old tree was a bed of green lawn grass belonging to a gas station. I asked the attendant if I could sleep there, and he said sure. So I stretched out a wool shirt, laid my face flat on it with an elbow out, and with one eye cocked at the snowy Rockies in the hot sun for just a moment. I fell asleep for 2 delicious hours, the only discomfort being an occasional Colorado ant. And here I am in Colorado, I kept thinking gleefully. Damn, I'm making it! And after a refreshing sleep filled with cobwebby dreams of my past life in the East, I got up, washed in the station men's room, and strode off, fit and slick as a fiddle, and got me a rich, thick milkshake at the Roadhouse to put some freeze in my hot, tormented stomach. Incidentally, a very beautiful Colorado gal shook me that cream. She was all smiles, too. I was grateful. It made up for last night. I said to myself, wow, what'll Denver be like? I got on that hot road, and off I went in a brand new car driven by a Denver businessman of about 35. He went 70. I tingled all over. I counted minutes and subtracted miles. Just ahead, over the rolling wheat fields all golden beneath the distant snows of Estes, I'd be seeing old Denver at last. I pictured myself in a Denver bar that night, with all the gang, and in their eyes I would be strange and ragged and like the prophet who has walked across the land to bring the dark word. And the only word I had was, wow. The man and I had a long, warm conversation about our respective schemes in life, and before I knew it, we were going over the wholesale fruit markets outside Denver. There were smokestacks, smoke, rail yards, red brick buildings, and the distant downtown graystone buildings. And here I was in Denver. He let me off at Larimer Street. I stumbled along with the most wicked grin of joy in the world, among the old bums and beat cowboys of Larimer Street. Six. In those days, I didn't know Dean as well as I do now, and the first thing I wanted to do was look up Chad King, which I did. I called up his house, talked to his mother. She said, "Why, Sal, what are you doing in Denver?" Chad is a slim blonde boy with a strange witch doctor face that goes with his interest in anthropology and prehistory Indians. His nose beaks softly and almost creamily under a golden flare or hair. He has the beauty and grace of a Western hotshot who danced in roadhouses and played a little football. A quavering twang comes out when he speaks. The thing I always liked, Sal, about the Plains Indians was the way they always got so danged embarrassed after they boasted the number of scalps they got. In Ruxton's life in the far west, there's an Indian who gets red all over blushing because he got so many scalps, and he runs like hell into the plains to glory over his deeds in hiding. Damn, that tickled me. Chad's mother located him in the drowsy Denver afternoon, working over his Indian basket making at the local museum. I called him there. He came and picked me up in his old Ford coupe that he used to take trips in the mountains to dig for Indian objects. He came into the bus station wearing jeans and a big smile. I was sitting on my bag on the floor talking to the very same sailor who'd been in the Cheyenne bus station with me, asking him what happened to the blonde. He was so bored he didn't answer. Chad and I got in his little coupe, and the first thing he had to do was get maps at the state building. Then he had to see an old school teacher, and so on, and all I wanted to do was drink beer. And in the back of my mind was the wild thought, where is Dean and what is he doing right now? Chad had decided not to be Dean's friend anymore for some odd reason, and he didn't even know where he lived. Is Carlo Marx in town? Yes, but he wasn't talking to him anymore either. This was the beginning of Chad King's withdrawal from our general gang. I was to take a nap in his house that afternoon. The word was that Tim Gray had an apartment waiting for me up Coifax Avenue, that Roland Major was already living in it and was waiting for me to join him. I sensed some kind of conspiracy in the air, and this conspiracy lined up two groups in the gang. It was Chad King and Tim Gray and Roland Major, together with the Rollinses, generally agreeing to ignore Dean Moriarty and Carlo Marx. I was smack in the middle of this interesting war. It was a war with social overtones. Dean was the son of a wino, one of the most tottering bums of Larimer Street, and Dean had in fact been brought up generally on Larimer Street and thereabouts. He used to plead in court at the age of 6 to have his father set free. He used to beg in front of Larimer alleys and sneak the money back to his father, who waited among the broken bottles with an old buddy. Then when Dean grew up, he began hanging around the Glenarm pool halls. He set a Denver record for stealing cars and went to the reformatory. From the age of 11 to 17, he was usually in reform school. His specialty was stealing cars, gunning for girls coming out of high school in the afternoon, driving them out to the mountains, making them, and coming back to sleep in any available hotel bathtub in town. His father, once a respectable and hard-working tinsmith, had become a wine alcoholic, which is worse than a whiskey alcoholic, and was reduced to riding freights to Texas in the winter and back to Denver in the summer. Dean had brothers on his dead mother's side. She died when he was small, but they disliked him. Dean's only buddies were the pool hall boys. Dean, who had the tremendous energy of a new kind of American saint, and Carlo were the underground monsters of that season in Denver, together with the pool hall gang. And, symbolizing this most beautifully, Carlo had a basement apartment on Grant Street, and we all met there many a night. That went to dawn. Carlo, Dean, myself, Tom Snark, Ed Dunkel, and Roy Johnson. More of these others later. My first afternoon in Denver, I slept in Chad King's room while his mother went on with her housework downstairs, and Chad worked at the library. It was a hot, High Plains afternoon in July. I would not have slept if it hadn't been for Chad King's father's invention. Chad King's father, a fine, kind man, was in his 70s, old and feeble, thin and drawn out, and telling stories with a slow relish. Good stories, too, about his boyhood on the North Dakota plains in the 80s. When for diversion, he rode ponies bareback and chased after coyotes with a club. Later, he became a country school teacher in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and finally a businessman of many devices in Denver. He still had his old office over a garage down the street. The roll-top desk was still there, together with countless dusty papers of past excitement and money-making. He had invented a special air conditioner. He put an ordinary fan in a window frame and somehow conducted cool water through coils in front of the whirring blades. The result was perfect, within 4 feet of the fan bowl. And then the water apparently turned into steam in the hot day, and the downstairs part of the house was just as hot as usual. But I was sleeping right under the fan on Chad's bed, with a big bust of Gerda staring at me, and I comfortably went to sleep, only to wake up in 20 minutes, freezing to death. I put a blanket on, and still I was cold. Finally, it was so cold I couldn't sleep, and I went downstairs. The old man asked me how his invention worked. I said it worked damn good, and I meant it within bounds. I liked the man. He was lean with memories. I once made a spot remover that has since been copied by big firms in the East. I've been trying to collect on that for some years now. If I only had enough money to raise a decent lawyer. But it was too late to raise a decent lawyer, and he sat in his house dejectedly. In the evening, we had a wonderful dinner his mother cooked. Venison steak that Chad's uncle had shot in the mountains. But where was Dean? Seven. The following 10 days were, as W.C. Fields said, fraught with imminent peril. And mad. I moved in with Roland Major in the really swank apartment that belonged to Tim Gray's folks. We each had a bedroom, and there was a kitchenette with food in the icebox, and a huge living room where Major sat in his silk dressing gown composing his latest Hemingwayan short story. A choleric, red-faced, pudgy hater of everything, who could turn on the warmest and most charming smile in the world when real life confronted him sweetly in the night. He sat like that at his desk, and I jumped around over the thick, soft rug wearing only my chino pants. He'd just written a story about a guy who comes to Denver for the first time. His name is Phil. His traveling companion is a mysterious and quiet fellow called Sam. Phil goes out to dig Denver and gets hung up with arty types. He comes back to the hotel room. Lugubriously, he says, "Sam, they're here too." And Sam is just looking out the window sadly. "Yes," says Sam, "I know." And the point was that Sam didn't have to go and look to know this. The arty types were all over America, sucking up its blood. Major and I were great pals. He thought I was the farthest thing from an arty type. Major liked good wines, just like Hemingway. He reminisced about his recent trip to France. "Ah, Sal, if you could sit with me high in the Basque Country with a cool bottle of Poignon de Neuf, then you'd know there are other things besides boxcars." I know that. It's just that I love boxcars and I love to read the names on them like Missouri Pacific, Great Northern, Rock Island Line. By gad, Major, if I could tell you everything that happened to me hitching here. The Rollinses lived a few blocks away. This was a delightful family. A youngish mother, part owner of a decrepit ghost town hotel, with 5 sons and 2 daughters. The wild son was Ray Rollins, Tim Gray's boyhood buddy. Ray came roaring in to get me and we took to each other right away. We went off and drank in the Colfax bars. One of Ray's sisters was a beautiful blonde called Babe, a tennis-playing, surf-riding doll of the West. She was Tim Gray's girl. And Major, who was only passing through Denver and doing so in real style in the apartment, was going out with the Tim Gray's sister Betty. I was the only guy without a girl. I asked everybody, "Where's Dean?" They made smiling negative answers. Then finally it happened. The phone rang and it was Carlo Marks. He gave me the address of his basement apartment. I said, "What are you doing in Denver? I mean, what are you doing? What's going on?" "Oh, wait till I tell you." I rushed over to meet him. He was working in May's department store nights. Crazy Ray Rollins called him up there from a bar, getting janitors to run after Carlo with a story that somebody had died. Carlo immediately thought it was me who had died. And Rollins said over the phone, "Sal's in Denver," and gave him my address and phone. "And where is Dean?" "Dean is in Denver, let me tell you." And he told me that Dean was making love to 2 girls at the same time, they being Mary Lou, his first wife, who waited for him in a hotel room, and Camille, a new girl who waited for him in a hotel room. Between the 2 of them, he rushes to me for our own unfinished business. "And what business is that?" "Dean and I are embarked on a tremendous season together. We're trying to communicate with absolute honesty and absolute completeness, everything on our minds. We've had to take Benzedrine. We sit on the bed, cross-legged, facing each other. I have finally taught Dean that he can do anything he wants, become mayor of Denver, marry a millionaire, or become the greatest poet since Rimbaud. But he keeps rushing out to see the midget auto races. I go with him. He jumps and yells, excited. "You know, Sal, Dean is really hung up on things like that." Mark said, in his soul, and thought about this. "What's the schedule?" I said. There was always a schedule in Dean's life. The schedule is this. I came off work a half hour ago. In that time, Dean is bawling Mary Lou at the hotel and gives me time to change and dress. At 1 sharp, he rushes from Mary Lou to Camille. Of course, neither one of them knows what's going on. And bangs her once, giving me time to arrive at 1:30. Then he comes out with me. First, he has to beg with Camille, who's already started hating me. And we come here to talk till 6 in the morning. We usually spend more time than that, but it's getting awfully complicated and he's pressed for time. Then at 6, he goes back to Maryland. And he's going to spend all day tomorrow running around to get the necessary papers for their divorce. Mary Lou's all for it, but she insists on banging in the interim. She says she loves him. So does Camille. Then he told me how Dean had met Camille. Roy Johnson, the pool hall boy, had found her in a bar and took her to a hotel. Pride taking over his sense, he invited the whole gang to come up and see her. Everybody sat around talking with Camille. Dean did nothing but look out the window. Then when everybody left, Dean merely looked at Camille, pointed at his wrist, made the sign, "Wits," meaning he'd be back at 4, and went out. At 3, the door was locked to Roy Johnson. At 4, it was open to Dean. I wanted to go right out and see the madman. Also, he had promised to fix me up. He knew all the girls in Denver. Carlo and I went through rickety streets in the Denver night. The air was soft, the stars so fine, the promise of every cobbled alley so great that I thought I was in a dream. We came to the rooming house where Dean haggled with Camille. It was an old red brick building surrounded by wooden garages and old trees that stuck up from behind fences. We went up carpeted stairs. Carlo knocked, then he darted to the back to hide. He didn't want Camille to see him. I stood in the door. Dean opened it stark naked. I saw a brunette on the bed, one beautiful creamy thigh covered with black lace, look up with mild wonder. "Why, Ale," said Dean. "Well now, yes, of course you've arrived. You old son of a bitch, you finally got on that old road? Well now look here, we must, yes, at once, we really must. Now Camille," and he swirled on her. "Sal is here. This is my old buddy from New York. This is his first night in Denver, and it's absolutely necessary for me to take him out and fix him up with a girl. But what time will you be back?" "It is now," looking at his watch. "Exactly 1:14. I shall be back at exactly 3:14 for our hour of reverie together. Real sweet reverie, darling. And then, as you know, as I told you, and as we agreed, I have to go and see the one-legged lawyer about those papers. In the middle of the night, strange as it seems, and as I thoroughly explained. This was a cover-up for his rendezvous with Carlo, who was still hiding. So now, in this exact minute, I must dress, put on my pants, go back to life, that is to outside life, streets and whatnot. As we agreed, it is now 1:15 and time's running. "Well, alright, Dean, but please be sure and be back at 3. "Just as I said, darling, and remember not 3 but 3:14. Are we straight in the deepest and most wonderful depths of our souls, dear darling?" And he went over and kissed her several times. On the wall was a new drawing of Dean, enormous angle and all, done by Camille. I was amazed. Everything was so crazy. Off we rushed into the night. Carlo joined us in an alley, and we proceeded down the narrowest, strangest, and most crooked little city street I've ever seen, deep in the heart of Denver, Mexican town. We talked in loud voices in the sleeping stillness. "Sal," said Dean, "I have just the girl waiting for you at this very minute, if she's off duty." Looking at his watch. "A waitress, Rita Betancourt, fine chick, slightly hung up on a few sexual difficulties which I've tried to straighten up, and I think you can manage. You fine granddaddy, you. So we'll go there at once. We must bring beer. No, they have some themselves, and damn," he said, socking his palm, "I've just got to get into her sister Mary tonight." "What?" said Carlo. "I thought we were going to talk." Yes, after." "Oh, these Denver doldrums," yelled Carlo to the sky. "Isn't he the finest, sweetest fellow in the world?" said Dean, punching me in the ribs. Look at him. And Carlo began his monkey dance in the streets of life, as I'd seen him do so many times everywhere in New York. And all I could say was, "Well, what the hell are we doing in Denver?" "Tomorrow, Sal, I know where I can find you a job," said Dean, reverting to business-like tones. "So I'll call on you soon as I have an hour off from Mary Lou and cut right into that apartment of yours, say hello to Major, and take you on a trolley. Damn, I've no car, to the Camargo Markets, where you can begin working at once and collect a paycheck come Friday. We're really all of us bottomy broke. I haven't had time to work in weeks. Friday night, beyond all doubt, the three of us, the old threesome of Carlo, Dean, and Sal, must go to the midget auto races, and for that I can get us a ride from a guy downtown I know." And on into the night. We got to the house where the waitress sisters lived. The one for me was still working, the sister that Dean wanted was in. We sat down on her couch. I was scheduled at this time to call Ray Rollins. I did. He came over at once. Coming into the door, he took off his shirt and undershirt and began hugging the absolute stranger, Mary Betancourt. Bottles rolled on the floor. 3 o'clock came. Dean rushed off for his hour of reverie with Camille. He was back on time. The other sister showed up. We all needed a car now, and we were making too much noise. Ray Rollins called up a buddy with a car. He came. We all piled in. Carlo was trying to conduct his scheduled talk with Dean in the back seat, but there was too much confusion. "Let's all go to my apartment," I shouted. We did. The moment the car stopped there, I jumped out and stood on my head in the grass. All my keys fell out. I never found them. We ran shouting into the building. Roland Major stood barring our way in his silk dressing gown. "I'll have no goings-on like this in Tim Gray's apartment." "What?" We all shouted. There was confusion. Rollins was rolling in the grass with one of the waitresses. Major wouldn't let us in. We swore to call Tim Gray and confirm the party and also invite him. Instead, we all rushed back to the Denver downtown hangouts. I suddenly found myself alone in the street with no money. My last dollar was gone. I walked 5 miles up Colfax to my comfortable bed in the apartment. Major had to let me in. I wondered if Dean and Carlo were having their heart-to-heart. I would find out later. The nights in Denver are cool, and I slept like a log.